December 25th, 1946, Mitchell Field, Long Island, New York. Snow slushed into gray ribbons along the taxiway outside the mess hall, and the wind coming off Hempstead Plains still smelled faintly of avgas and coal smoke. Inside, under a string of sagging tinsel, Lieselot Weber stood in a borrowed white kitchen apron, pressing down the creases of a Christmas tablecloth, white with a thin red trim, on a trestle table meant for American flyers. The big floor model RCA radio in the corner crackled out Bing Crosby's "I'll Be Home for Christmas," its tubes giving off a warm, dusty smell that mixed with boiled potatoes and roast bird. She was prisoner of war number G412, but tonight they called her Miss Weber. A U.S. sergeant in olive drab had even joked, "You typed the thing that kept our boys in the air. Figure you can spoon gravy too." Behind her, 3 other Germans, still in dull, laundered work fatigues from the camp, were carving, stirring, carrying. On the far side of the room, 2 young American pilots in war's end khaki watched the scene with an odd, quiet gratitude. She had thought, back in March, that she was only typing symbols for an American captain, fractions, exponents, a correction term he called the impossible bit. She hadn't understood why precision mattered. Now she saw one of the pilots whose training had been altered because of that formula, his left arm still in a sling, smiling at her. "Fräulein," one of the POWs murmured in German, low so the guards wouldn't mind. This is strange, ja? "It is better than Munich 45, she said, equally low. Outside, sleet ticked against the mess hall windows like typewriter keys hitting carriage stops. If you want more frontline, human-side war stories like this, stay with the series and tell me which country you're listening from. 9 months earlier, Statistical Control Section, Mitchell Field. Snowmelt lay in gray ridges along the parade ground when the olive-drab truck stopped in front of the administrative building. Lieselot Weber climbed down after the other 2 German prisoners, boots hitting cold asphalt, hands still tucked into the 2 big wool gloves the camp had issued. The military police corporal beside the truck jerked his chin toward the steps. "This way, miss. Don't wander." "Jawohl," she said automatically, then corrected herself in careful English. "Yes, corporal." The air smelled different from Bavaria, iodine and sea wind off the Atlantic, coal smoke from the base heating plant, a faint sharpness of aviation fuel. Beyond the admin block, she glimpsed the tail of a parked transport, olive drab with the white star. It made her stomach tighten the way bombers over Augsburg once had, even though it was silent. Inside, the corridors were warm and full of American sound, typewriters clacking in steady, confident rhythms, women in tailored jackets, wax, carrying, clipboards, officers' voices, relaxed now that the war was done. Lisa's own typing hands twitched at the familiar clatter. She had been good at that, in Augsburg. Lists of parts, repair turnarounds, readiness forms, anonymous work, necessary. A whack corporal with dark hair looked her over. "This the German typist, corporal?" "Yes, ma'am. From the POW compound." The whack's eyes narrowed, not unkindly, just measuring. "Captain Mallory's people are in statistical control. She's to go up, sign in, and stay seated unless told otherwise. You understand, Weber?" "Yes." Her accent dragged the vowel down. "I type. I stay." They took her up to a room that could have been anywhere in any army. Desks in rows, green blotters, a map of the eastern seaboard with red pins, a pot-bellied radiator hissing. The difference was the stack of AAF Form 5s, flight records, on the nearest desk, and the calendar on the wall, March 1946. The war was over, but they were still measuring it. A man in shirt sleeves and captain's bars stood over a drafting board, scowling at a sheaf of smudged papers. "That the German clerk?" "Yes, sir." He turned. American, mid-30s, hair already receding, sleeves rolled to show he worked. You type German technical? Luftwaffe schedules? Yes, Captain. How about English? Symbols? Fractions? I can follow if it is clear, Lisa said, eyes flicking to his papers. They were not clear. Lines of figures, exponents crowded in margins, a denominator with 3 terms fighting for space. He sighed. Good. I'm Mallory. You're POW attached, so you'll have an MP outside. You get breaks when told, but if you can make this legible, he tapped the worst of the pages, you'll save me about 3 days. It was the first time since capture anyone had talked to her like she could save time. She set her satchel down, flexed her fingers, and let the steady, oiled smell of the Remington noiseless typewriter on the spare desk wash over her. This was better than field latrines and potato peels. This was work she understood. Outside in the hall, the MP settled to wait. Mallory set the papers down on her desk with a flat slap, as if weight alone could make them orderly. They want this upstairs by 1400, he said, glancing at the wall clock. Command wants a neat version for duplication. I can't read my own handwriting anymore. Think you can? Lisa drew the stack toward herself. The top sheet was the worst kind of officer draft. Penciled fractions at odd angles, a corrective arrow, a parenthetical icing agi factor, and a denominator crammed with 3 variables fighting for space. Beneath it, the narrative paragraph. When maintenance score 0.92 and temp 30 Statüdegrad apply. It was English, but it was the same bureaucratic music she'd heard in German. Yes, she said, but I must place the lower line here. She tapped where the main fraction bar should go. Do it however you Kraut clerks did it, he said, but there was no malice in it, only hurry. Just make it legible. She rolled a fresh sheet into the Remington. The platen was cold under her fingers. She set 2 sheets of carbon under it. Mallory would want an immediate copy. Then she began to map the formula in her head the way she had for Luftwaffe spares tables. Widest part first, then the subordinate terms. Click of keys. The office around her receded into heater hiss and distant telephone rings. She spaced twice, hit the underscore to fake a fraction line, backed up, centered the numerator. Where Mallory had scrawled a Greek letter she couldn't type, she used the American workaround he'd shown her, capitalizing the nearest Roman and labeling it in parentheses in the narrative below. Precision was not the same as perfection. Precision was consistency. Halfway through, the carriage jammed because she'd tried to overtype an exponent. She muttered in German, 9 still, lifted the carriage, realigned, struck it again more lightly. On the next page, she typed the explanatory paragraph in clean, indented lines so an officer could scan it without cursing. At 1347, she pulled the final sheet free. The black ink sat in neat hierarchies. Main fraction, adjustment factor, conditions. It looked like something real, something that could travel upward. Mallory read it standing up. His shoulders eased. That's it, he said. That's actually readable. I can send that. She felt the flush of being useful rise, then the sting. This would help American pilots not fly when their machines were below tolerance. Her hands, which had once fed a different air force, had done that. Outside, she heard the mimeograph start up down the hall, its wet ink thump proof that her page was becoming many. They released her back to the compound at 1600, MP escort at her elbow, a folded work pass in her coat pocket. The March air hit her face cold and damp. Off toward the runways she heard an engine run up, rough at first, then smoothing. Training, Mallory had said once, didn't stop just because peace was signed. Training killed men too. The next morning she was sent up again. Short task, he'd said, just labels for the report packets. She finished early. On her way back down the corridor, carrying the empty manila folder to return to the clerk's desk, she heard voices just around the corner by the map wall. So I told Lieutenant Harker, if maintenance writes it at .91, you don't take a bird up in icing. Not now, not with the new schedule. An American voice, young, officer casual, the consonants soft. Yeah, well, I'm not arguing. I was supposed to do that hop Tuesday. Major bumped me to Friday after Mallory's memo. Weather cleared, I still get the hours. And I don't have to explain to my wife why I went down on Long Island in peacetime. They laughed, low. Paper rustled. One of them tapped something. She knew the sound of a fingernail on mimeograph glaze. That math of his looked like Greek to me, but it got command to listen. She froze just before the corner, folder tight against her chest. The memo. His math. No, her layout of his math. She could picture it now in blue Mimeo ink, the fractions straight, the conditions spelled out underneath. Temp, maintenance, hours. They had read it. They had changed their flights because of it. Mallory around? The first pilot asked. He's upstairs. Tell him thanks. She slipped past only when their steps went the other way. In the stairwell, she stood still, pulse a hard, surprised drum in her throat. She had spent 1944 typing requisitions that sent spare parts to Messerschmitt frames. She had never heard a pilot say, "Tell her thanks." Through the stairwell window, she saw the field under a pale Atlantic sky. The war was over, but men still went up and came down, or didn't, depending on lines of ink. This time, her hands had tilted the choice toward living. For them. The compound at Mitchell Field sat behind a double run of wire and a guard tower that now seemed more bored than hostile. By 1946, the fences held men who were mostly waiting for ships, for papers, for a ruined home to go back to. The barracks smelled of damp boots and GI wool blankets, of coffee that wasn't real coffee, of men who had stopped pretending the war could be won. When Lisa came back with the day's work pass folded in her pocket, a few heads lifted. Word traveled quickly in a closed space. "You were in the offices again," said Kruger, once a Luftwaffe Feldwebel, still carrying himself like he had stripes. "What do they have you typing, Mädchen? More names of our men?" "American flight reports," she said, unbuttoning her coat. "Accident numbers. Training. So they can fly safer," he said, and let the words hang. Around him, 2 other prisoners smirked, not at her, but at the absurdity of helping the victors. Lisa sat on her lower bunk, fingers working at the laces of her boots. So they do not crash when it is ice and the machine is not ready. It is only numbers. Numbers that keep their pilots alive, Kruger said. We did not get such care from them over Dresden. The old anger flared in her chest. Augsburg under sirens, the warehouse windows blown out, but she kept her voice even. These are boys who did not bomb anything. Training. It is 1946. It is finished. From the corner, at the small potbelly stove where he was stirring a dented GI pot, Vogel, the camp cook, glanced over. He had been infantry once, but captivity had made him practical. "A dead flyer is still a corpse to bury," he muttered. "American or German? If the woman can stop that with a typewriter, let her," Kruger snorted. "Spoken like a man who gets extra rations." "Spoken like a man who has carried a body bag," Vogel said back, not looking up. The room's tension eased a notch. Lisa met Vogel's eye and gave the smallest nod. Someone in here understood that precision was not the enemy. On the wall by the door hung the work detail board. Her name was now a regular line under Airbase Office. It was visible to every man in the barracks. Tomorrow and the next day, she would have to keep proving this wasn't betrayal, just the only kind of useful she had left. The next week, the weather turned wetter, a persistent Atlantic drizzle that filmed the admin windows and made the base look smaller. Lisa had just finished typing a short distribution list, 3 copies, 1 for group, 1 for ops, 1 for records, when the MP at the door said, Captain wants you a minute," and jerked his head toward the end office. Mallory's door was open. He was standing by the filing cabinet, steaming paper cup in hand, U.S. coffee, thin but hot. On his desk lay the blue inked memo she had typed from the formula, now creased and initialed along the margin. "Weber," he said, waving her in. "That survivability adjustment? The colonel signed off. Group sent it to the other fields. They're actually using the numbers." She stopped just inside, hands clasped. "Because it was correct?" "Because it was readable," he said, with a tired grin. "Same thing most days. I can't push policy if the brass can't tell a denominator from a typo. Your layout made it idiot-proof." He said it like a working officer, not like a man bestowing charity. That was what struck her. In Augsburg, officers had assumed the women in the typing pool would keep up. Here, an American captain was telling a German POW she had enabled command action. "They spoke in the hall," she said. "Pilots. They said the schedule changed." "Yeah," Mallory said, sipping. "One of the boys would have been out in marginal weather earlier this week. Instead, he got bumped. He came down to thank me. I figured I'd thank the person whose fingers actually did the work." Her throat tightened in a way she hadn't expected. "It is good," she managed, "if they do not crash. That's the idea. War's over. We're trying not to kill ourselves stateside." He set the cup down. "You keep giving me clean copy like that. I'll keep you out of potato peel duty. Fair?" "Yes, Captain." On his desk, amid demobilization circulars and redeployment rosters, her typed formula sat like a small, precise bridge between last year's enemy and this year's problem. He had noticed it. He had said it out loud. As she left, she heard two officers in the corridor talking about Christmas rations for the base. Mallory's voice joined theirs, casual. He knew now there was a German clerk worth inviting into. Something human. The siren wasn't the air raid kind she knew from Augsburg, but the base klaxon still punched straight through the office walls. Lisa looked up from a stack of carbon copies to see two enlisted men hurry past the glass, winter coats half on. Out the window, beyond the admin block, an olive drab ambulance, Dodge WC she'd learned the look of them, bounced over the wet service road toward the runways. She stood without meaning to, craning for a better view. The sky was low, a damp Long Island gray, and she could see sleet spitting against the glass. Not flying weather, she thought instinctively. Mallory came in 10 minutes later, cap still on, shoulders scattered with melting flecks. He didn't bother to take off the coat. He laid a single sheet in front of her. "Hempstead Auxiliary Field," he said. Trainee put it down hard, not dead. Broke the main gear, banged himself up. She scanned the report. It was in English, but the structure was one she knew. Date, tail number, pilot hours, weather, field condition, maintenance score. In the margins, someone had scribbled, "Schedule not updated." The temperature line read just below freezing. Maintenance, 0.91. Her throat tightened. "This is exactly the condition," she said, tapping the maintenance line, "in the memo." "Yeah," Mallory said, jaw tight. "We pushed that memo because of weather and marginal maintenance. This kid shouldn't have been up this morning. Either the update didn't reach them, or somebody treated it like a suggestion." She looked out again. The ambulance was parked now, medics moving briskly. No one ran like they did for fatalities. That was something. Mallory leaned on the desk. "This proves we weren't crying wolf, Weber. The math said don't. He went anyway. Now ops can hammer it in." "It could have been worse," she said. "It could have been a funeral detail. That's what we're trying to stop." He didn't say, "That's what you helped stop," but she heard it underneath. And to her own surprise, she felt more than professional satisfaction. She felt relief. Relief that an American boy she had never met, who maybe had flown over her country, would still write home. She set the report aside, squared it with the desk edge. "Then it must be more clear," she said, "to everyone." Mallory nodded slowly, thinking, "Yeah, maybe we make it more than a memo. Maybe we make it a story people remember." He glanced at her, weighing something. "And maybe we let them see the people behind the numbers, come Christmas." The sleet ticked steadily on the window, like type bars on glass. It was early December when the camp clerk tacked up the new worksheet. Cold had settled in for real now, a dry Atlantic cold that made the barracks stove the best spot in the room. Lisa went to look for her usual line, airbase, office, but found her name shifted. Base, mess, holiday prep. She stared a moment. Cooking was not her assignment. Behind her, the POW sergeant barked names for snow shoveling detail, then saw where her finger rested. "Office princess got kitchen work now," he said, not quite unkindly. "Americans want all hands for Christmas, eh?" "I am attached to statistical control," Lisa said. Captain Mallory said, "He is not the one who signs this," the sergeant said, tapping the sheet. "You go where they say." So she went, escorted as always, across the frosty yard to the low building that smelled of onions, coffee, and GI canned goods. Inside, the American mess sergeant, sleeves rolled, eyed the German prisoners being delivered. "You folks keep your mitts clean," he said. "You peel, you carry, you don't wander. We got turkeys coming in on the 23rd, maybe a ham if supply isn't lying. Nobody steals, nobody mouths off." Lisa felt the small humiliation of being lumped back in with general labor. She was about to ask for Mallory when he appeared in the doorway, cap on, collar up against the wind. "She's with me," he told the mess sergeant, then turned to her. "Weber, don't worry. This isn't a downgrade." She lowered her voice. "Then why mess, Captain?" He glanced past her at the long tables, already stacked with GI issue platters, and on a side counter, a tin with a red and green label from the PX, gingerbread, American style. "Because a couple of those boys who got bumped from that bad weather hop asked to meet the German girl who made the math legible. I can't parade a POW through Officers Club, but I can have you on kitchen duty, serving at a Christmas dinner. They get to put a face to it. You get out of the compound for a holiday. Everybody wins." She looked at the tables again, imagined them with cloths and plates. "They wish to thank me." "They wish to thank the person who kept them from crashing," he said. "Turns out that's you." Awkward warmth crept in under the POW coat. Being seen was more frightening than typing in a quiet office, but she nodded. "I will make it good," she said. "Do that," Mallory said. "They'll remember it better than a mimeograph." They started 2 days before Christmas because the turkeys had to thaw. The mess hall was warmer than any barracks. Steam from the giant pots clouded the windows and made the snow outside look like a painted backdrop. Lisa stood with her sleeves rolled, wiping down a long trestle table, while Vogel and another POW peeled potatoes under the watchful eye of the American mess sergeant. "Keep those skins out of the sink," he said, "and don't get creative. Menu set." "What is the menu?" Lisa asked. "Turkey, dressing, gravy, mashed, some kind of candied carrots if supply doesn't screw me. Coffee. And we got that gingerbread tin from the PX in case the colonel walks through." He jerked his chin toward the sideboard. The tin was metal, bright, with holly printed on it. American, but the smell when she opened it was not far from Lebkuchen, molasses, spice, winter. She closed it again carefully. While she worked, someone dragged from storage a stack of folded tablecloths. Most were plain, off-white, army issue. At the bottom was one that didn't look army at all, white with a thin red trim, the kind you'd see in a German home on Christmas Eve if war hadn't stripped the linen chest. She ran her thumb along the red edge. "You like that one?" the mess sergeant asked. "It is festive," she said. "Use it for the table by the radio then. That's where the flyboys sit." By the radio. In the corner stood a big RCA floor model, wood-polished dull from years of use. One of the Americans plugged it in and tuned until the static cleared into a Christmas broadcast. Bing Crosby again. And then, "O Come, All Ye Faithful," which she knew as Adeste Fideles. For a moment, the Atlantic between their Decembers vanished. She spread the red-trimmed cloth slowly, smoothing every wrinkle so it wouldn't shame her. This wasn't a German table or an American table. It was simply a 1946 table for people who had survived the war in different ways. Vogel passed her with a pan, murmured, "Smells like home a little." "Yes," she said, arranging cutlery the way she'd seen in the officers' mess upstairs. "A little." Outside, sleet ticked against the windows like typewriter keys. Inside, it was all heat and metal and carols, the small, ordinary noises of peace being practiced. By late afternoon on the 25th, the mess hall smelled like every winter meal she could remember: fat, starch, coffee, and also like something new: American floor polish, American tinsel, American radio voices. Outside the windows, the sky was already iron-colored. Inside, the white tablecloth with red trim lay flat, plates and steel cutlery in place. The RCA in the corner murmured Bing Crosby under the clatter. They had put the POWs in clean work clothes. No German insignia, just plain laundered fatigues and aprons. A U.S. guard stood by the door, carbine slung, but his face was relaxed. Vogel was at the carving board with an American corporal, two men from opposite sides of the Atlantic, arguing quietly over thickness of slices. Lisa carried a small clipboard to check the serving order: turkey, potatoes, gravy, then the gingerbread tin at the end. The clipboard was clipped over a sheet of scrap mimeograph. Blue ink bled through, a long fraction line, 3 cramped terms and a denominator. She hadn't noticed which piece of paper she'd picked up. The pilots came in by 2s and 3s, young men in khaki shirts, some with flight jackets slung over shoulders despite the indoor heat. A few had wives or sweethearts on their arms. Local, she guessed, from Long Island. Towns. Their talk dimmed a little when they saw the Germans behind the tables. Not hostile, just taking it in. A sergeant grinned at her, recognizing her from the kitchen. "You typed the thing that kept our boys in the air. Figure you can spoon gravy too." She dipped the ladle, kept her head steady. "Yes, Sergeant." One of the pilots, tall with his left arm in a sling, moved a step closer as he took his plate. His eyes flicked down, not at her face, but at the clipboard. He frowned, then leaned in. "Is that Mallory's accident memo?" he asked, low, as if he couldn't quite believe it. "The one with the maintenance cutoffs." She blinked, followed his gaze, and saw the ghost of the formula through the roster. For a second she was back in March, striking underscores. "It is the scrap from the office," she said. "I typed it." He looked up at her properly then, the room's noise receding. Not contempt, recognition. Behind him, others waited with plates, and the line had to move. But the connection had been made. The woman behind the serving table and the lines of ink that had kept him on the ground that bad day. "Guess I picked the right day to say thanks," he said, and moved on, leaving her pulse high and her ladle trembling only slightly as she poured gravy for the next man. The line had thinned. Most of the pilots were seated now, heads bent over plates, laughter rising in short bursts that didn't quite erase the strangeness of Germans serving Christmas dinner in an American hall. The guard by the door shifted his weight, bored but alert. Outside, the sleet still ticked at the windows. Lisa was wiping a spill from the red-trimmed cloth when she sensed someone step back up to the table. It was the tall pilot with the sling. Up close, she could see the pale scar along his jaw, the 2 new khaki shirt that said he'd been issued replacements after an accident. "Miss Weber?" he said, careful with the German name. "Yes." "I didn't want to hold up the line before," he said, "but I figured I should say it clear. That memo, training schedule adjustment, dated March 29th? That's why I wasn't up in icing that Tuesday." She knew the date. She had typed it. "You were on that list?" "I was on that list," he said. "Maintenance wrote my ship at .91. Under the old schedule, I would have flown anyway. Under yours, I got bumped." Weather turned, just like the numbers said. He glanced toward Mallory, who was talking to another officer by the door. He said it was the German clerk who made the impossible formula readable. The words from earlier in the evening fell back into place. "You typed the thing that kept our boys in the air. Figure you can spoon gravy too." Now she heard the weight under the joke. "I only typed," she said. "Captain Mallory wrote." He shook his head. "I've seen his handwriting. If you hadn't straightened it out, it never would have made it past group." He shifted the plate in his good hand. "So, thank you. I didn't expect to be thanking someone from your side, but I like being alive." It was the simplest statement of value she had heard since 1945. Not politics, not victory, just liking to be alive. "I also," she said, almost smiling, "like that you are alive." For a second, they stood in the same warm air, sharing the smell of roast turkey and gingerbread, 2 people who had spent years trying to keep each other's countries from the sky. Then he nodded, respectful, and went back to his table. The hall sounded different after that, as if someone had turned down a tension she hadn't known was humming. She straightened the cloth once more, hands steady now. This was the right use of her precision. Once the serving was done, the mess sergeant waved the POWs toward the end table. "You worked, you eat," he said. "Don't make me explain it twice." The guard by the door watched, but he didn't object. Geneva and Christmas were on their side tonight. Lisa sat with Vogel and 2 other Germans at the far end, near the window where the sleet had turned to a fine, icy rain. Their plates looked like everyone else's: turkey, potatoes, gravy, a spooned square of something sweet. The RCA was playing a swingy carol now, and the pilots' voices were louder, easier. At first the Germans ate in that careful, hunched way of prisoners, aware of being observed. Then Vogel chewed, swallowed, and said, just loud enough for the nearest American table to hear, "Amerikanischer Truthahn," always a little dry. There was a beat where that could have gone wrong. Then the pilot with the sling laughed, short and real. "That's because we didn't let your people cook it sooner," he called back. A couple of the other Americans chuckled. Even the guard's mouth twitched. The tension that had sat like a second coat on everyone's shoulders loosened. Vogel grinned, satisfied, and reached for the salt. Lisa felt something unclench in her chest. This was what she had wanted back in the barracks when she'd argued with Kruger. Proof that helping keep men alive was not betrayal, but a way of stepping out of 1944. At a nearby table, 2 officers were talking about repatriation dates, ships in early 47, paperwork still catching up. One of them nodded toward the POW end. "That one. Weber? She's on the list for return when they clear the admin workers." She heard, but didn't let it pull her out of the moment. Here, tonight, she was not a unit to be shipped. She was the woman who had made the impossible formula readable and then ladled gravy over it. The radio slipped into silent night. For the first time since coming to America, the song didn't feel stolen. They let the POW kitchen detail stay to help with cleanup. After the pilots left, after the officers had taken their coffee, the mess hall fell into a quieter rhythm. The scrape of chairs, the hush of brooms, the soft clunk of stacked plates. The RCA was still on, but lower now, playing dance numbers from New York. The red-trimmed tablecloth bore a few gravy spots, proof that people had eaten well. Lisa folded the cloth carefully, the way her mother would have, making sure the red edge lay straight. She set it with the others. On the sideboard, the PX gingerbread tin stood open, a few pieces left. The mess sergeant, checking his inventory, saw her glance at it. "Take some," he said. "You folks pulled your weight." "Can I wrap?" she asked, nodding toward the roll of brown paper by the supply shelf. "Sure. It's Christmas." She chose 2 pieces only, enough to be generous to herself later, not enough to look like theft. She laid them on the paper, folded the corners in, and tied it with a bit of twine. It was an ordinary unmilitary shape, the kind of small wrapped thing you might carry on a train. In January, the officers had said, the next draft of German POWs would ship out, New York to Bremerhaven, or to some other battered port. She pictured herself stepping off into the cold, into streets where walls still showed brick bones, and setting this little packet on a table to tell the story. In America, in '46, I served Christmas dinner to the men whose planes did not fall because I typed well. She looked once more around the hall, the windows streaked with freezing rain, the guard at the door, cap low, yawning, Vogel wiping down the carving board, the big American radio with its warm, dusty smell. All of it fixed itself in her mind with the same precision she used on a page. Accuracy, she thought, is not theirs or ours. It is just the way to keep people alive. Outside, the rain had let up. The MP at the door gestured. Time to go back through the wire. She slipped the brown packet into her coat pocket and stepped out into the Long Island night, carrying a memory wrapped as neatly as any formula.